context would be really helpful. For example, I didn't know until someone told me that it would cost some $400 million to replace the bridges that go over to West Salem. $400 million. And so when someone says this is an $8 billion program, some people might say, boy, that sure is huge, spread out over 10 years. But maybe you guys can share with us where that really fits in light of what does $8 billion do for the state? Does it fix everything? Can we say goodbye to congestion in Portland with $8 billion?
Certainly not. That's the problem. As you just pointed out, we'll just look at the Abernethy Bridge, which is, I think, is around in the $250 million range, because you were giving an example. If you do the lane widening in the Abernethy Bridge, it's about $450 million. And as population continues to grow in Portland, and as business continues to expand, the congestion continues to pack itself in. As you've also mentioned, just a bridge. We have, hundreds of bridges that we need to replace in the state of Oregon over the next decade. And what we're doing is making a down payment on that and trying to create a mechanism in which going forward we can then, instead of coming back here every 2 to 3 years, and there's a lot of people like it the old way, let's come back every 2 or 3 years, and which is why we're now sitting on a stack of bridges that need to be replaced. Half of them were identified, Mr. Vice Chair, in your work group. And so what this does is gives us a starting place going down the road. But what it does do, that we hope is in the tasking, is it empowers Oregon Transportation Commission then to turn around, because we the legislature are sort of giving them their marching orders for the next 3 to 6 years, is for them to come back to the legislature and say, okay, here is the path forward specifically over the next 20 years. This doesn't solve all the problems, and it certainly is not going to solve the congestion problem.
This is trying to take the long look at it, as we started out talking about, trying to look out 20 years and start addressing some of this. It is one, as we all know, as legislators, we don't like to take votes on these things. The reality is we didn't come back every 2 years. It's about a decade between each vote. So this kind of gets to that point a little bit. If we do this one, future legislators won't have to take another vote for a decade on the transportation system. But it builds up, and it doesn't do it all at once. I mean, the stepping in process, that's too much for the public to assume all at once, but it steps in slowly. We will still be left with the cost per transportation that's less than most of the other states. Still be less, and it does move us back more towards a user pay system. I think the one thing we learned is that public in general, Representative Bentz brought this up a lot on the tours, and we'd ask him, how much do you think you pay to drive your car? And we'd get the $1,000 to $2,000 a year range, and what we found out is that the average cost that Oregonians pay to drive is about $157 a year. That's what it costs them in fees and gas tax to drive on the road. Some more than that, obviously, some less. So this gets us there, but Representative, you're right. We talked about when we looked at the project that's on the cover, actually, this thing, I think it was at one time, the Woodburn project. When we finished that one, before they did that project, at Christmas time, we had people stopping in the center lane on I-5 and certainly backing up for 2 miles on the inside lane, or the outside lane, I guess it'd be. That project was over $80 million. The one right behind it, the Aurora interchange that we're starting to see the same kind of things happening now, is again projected to be in the $60 to $80 million range. They're all in that, these things cost a lot, and I think people think of them as government projects, but remember that but transportation in Oregon is probably the most privatized public service that there is. We don't, the public agencies don't build things. It all goes out to low bid contract for the most part. So these are real costs. It's just what it is, and it's real expensive to maintain the system. I'm reminded driving back and forth daily now from Springfield to the Capitol, the work that they're doing south of here, the road it's just torn to heck, and we've seen that in the north end, so it's there. I put it in context. I was thinking about this the other day, and when I started making the trip up here in '91, the traffic in Wilsonville was about a third of what it is now. Yeah. The traffic that I'm seeing going from Salem going south now is about what it was then when I first started coming up here, going north to Salem. And that's just going to continue. And if you think about Portland, the metro area in 2015 alone grew by 27,000 people. That's a lot more tires on the road and a lot more congestion to deal with than that. Our trip brought home to me the complaint that the businesses, wherever we went in Oregon, the solid complaint that we have heard from everybody was how much it was costing them to get through the metro area. And we forget sometimes that we're an exporting state, and all the freight, the economy of Oregon has to go that way. And to the extent we're stopping it, we're hurting our job expansion, we're hurting the economy of the state. So it's an issue, and it's just a question of do we want to address it or not.